And what we oftentimes try to do is we try to reckon with our tragedy. Try to reckon with it. Try to make sense of it. We try to calculate it. We try to find a reason. We try to understand it. And we wrestle with the same questions that Mac does here. And he's wrestling with questions like this. Even if God isn't responsible, he has the power to stop it. Why didn't he? Did he use it to punish me? These are common things that run through our minds, common conversations that we have. Is this all one big scheme to get me to here? Did this all happen just to get me to this point? And we question and we have those same sort of questions. Well, what I want to do real quick, did you leave it up? Okay. What I want to do real quick is I want to take you back 2 minutes. I want to take you back to the story of the Indian princess. And if you weren't here last week, or you need further context on what's going on in the film, the family, Mac was taking his kids on a lake trip. They go on the lake trip and they pass in this falls in Oregon. And I looked this up because I was curious. I started doing some research. Multnomah Falls is actually a real falls in Oregon. And they shot this scene at this actual falls. It's the tallest falls in Oregon. Now I want to go. I'm interested. It looks beautiful. You'll see it here again in just a moment. But the kids are like, you got to pull over. You got to tell Missy, the youngest daughter, the one who gets kidnapped, you got to tell Missy the story about the Indian princess, the legend of the Indian princess. Well, I looked into this. It's actually a true legend. I know those don't go together, but it's not something that the movie made up. It's actually a legend, and this is actually where the legend of Multnomah Falls. So it's not just something that the movie made up to make a tie to Jesus because it sounds like what Jesus did for us. It's actually the legend of Multnomah Falls. So I want you to listen to this legend one last time, but I want to draw your attention at the symbolism that occurs here in the film. So if you weren't here, I want you to listen to Mac retell the story, and hopefully this refreshes everyone else's memory. Let's go ahead and play that clip.
Long time ago, there was an Indian princess.
What did she look like?
Well, she was very pretty.
What color was her hair?
Like this. Do you want me to tell you this story? Okay. Well, this princess was the only daughter of the eldest chief. And he was the leader of a great tribe. One summer, a terrible sickness spread through the land. It was so fierce, even the strongest warriors fell ill. They were on the verge of death. So all the chiefs met to see what they could do. Princess's father, he told of a prophecy. The illness could only be stopped if the daughter of a chief gave up her life for her people. After a long debate, they knew they couldn't ask for such a sacrifice. And the princess, when she heard about this prophecy, she knew what she had to do because she loved her people so much. One morning, she climbed up to those rocks. And without hesitation, she jumped. Next morning, great healing came over the tribe. The sick began to rise from their beds. Everyone rejoiced. But the chief knew that his daughter was missing. He knew what she'd done. His heart broke. Tears rolled down his cheek. He cried out, asking for his daughter's sacrifice to be remembered. The Great Spirit was so moved by his tears that he answered his prayers. And water began to fall right there. That's how Multnomah Falls was created. Ready to go.
Shotgun.
All right. So there it is. There's the legend once again of Multnomah Falls. This whole movie is one beautiful painting that comes together. But later in that very same night, if you remember from our viewing last week, they're in the camper together. The family's in the camper together, and Mac is saying goodnight to Missy. And Missy is asking excellent questions about this legend that she has heard. She says, "Why is he so mean?" And then Mackenzie's like, "Who?" And she's like, "The Great Spirit. The Great Spirit made the Indian princess jump off the cliff and made Jesus die on the cross. Don't you think that's mean?" And then she says, "Daddy, will I ever have to jump off of a cliff?" And the reason I want to draw your attention to this is I believe Mac is struggling throughout the film with these very questions that Missy asked him in the beginning. And really, after what happens to Missy, he's starting to buy into this concept that God is mean. Or even just this logic and this reason that many of us buy into, that God will go to whatever extreme lengths, no matter the cost, to ensure that everyone has eternal salvation. And many preachers, many teachers will even preach that and believe that we even have this mindset that even if God isn't the one pulling the trigger, he might have as well been the one who loaded the gun. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of how we reckon things in our minds when it comes to the bad that happens and the tragedy and suffering that exists around us. Well, even if he's not the one pulling the strings, ultimately, he might as well have loaded the gun, thinking that he allows things that are evil to serve a greater good. For instance, Mac could have looked at his circumstances, and I think he was, and I think this is what we see. He's looking at his circumstances, and he's thinking, maybe God made Missy the sacrifice to saving his eternal soul, because that was more valuable to God than her earthly life. And isn't that how we often interpret our losses, our tragedy, our suffering that happens in our lives? Even though it's painful, the way that we oftentimes reckon with it, make sense of it, try to understand it, is that, oh, this happened, God allowed this to happen because of this. But we're always looking for that this that comes from the tragedy. And this movie is changing my mind on that, because I've even struggled with that, always trying to make sense of my tragedy, loss, and suffering that happens in my life. Yet I think this has distorted and diminished our view of God and negatively impacted our relationship with Him. Let me break it down for you, just as the movie does. God chose to love us. See, Jesus says it to Mac when they're sitting on the dock looking at the stars. He says to Mac, he says, "You are the center of our love and purpose." You are. You're the point. You're the center of our love and purpose, to love you. But the only way that God could choose to love was if there was an alternative will, as the movie talks about, in the universe. And as long as there is this alternative will, as the movie says, evil can find its way in. But that is where many of us get caught up. And we immediately go to, He allowed it, He caused it. He allowed it. He caused it because of some greater purpose. I know this tragedy I had to deal with, but eternally there was victory. And we kind of reckon with it like that in our minds. And that's where many of us end up settling in that conversation of good and evil and where God falls on the spectrum. But I want to take you back to what Papa says in the beginning of our viewing tonight, because it's so crucial. It's the point. Papa says this: the real underlying flaw in your life is that you don't think that I'm good. So powerful. This phrase hit me like a ton of bricks, because how can God be good yet allow bad things to happen, right? Hasn't that been one of, if not the main question that humanity most commonly asks about God for generations? And yet all this time I've been trying to give reasons, as a preacher especially, give reasons and find ways to properly answer that question. Because that's a huge question for a lot of people. If God is good, how can He allow bad things to happen? Yet I never stop to realize the answer has been in the question all along. How can God be good yet allow bad things to happen? It's right there. He doesn't. That's the answer. He never has. He never will. He simply loves. Now catch this. Oh man, I'm going to get excited. Listen, catch this. This is important. I want you to see it completely different tonight, because it's changing the way I see God. He simply loves. It's at the center of His purpose. He simply loves. Yet you got to understand something. That love is so constant. That love is so persistent. That love is so consistent. That love is so unwavering. That love is so unstoppable that it makes a way for corruption, for pollution, for contamination to get in. Think about it like this. Imagine God's love like an open window. Thought of this analogy earlier, and I'm going to roll with it. Think of God's love like an open window. You see, if I chose to open a window in my house for the purpose of letting in some fresh air, why did I open the window? Thank you. For fresh air. But, continuing with that analogy, what are some possible drawbacks to the window being open? Think about it. Animals could come into my house. Squirrels, bats, birds, I don't know, whatever, what have you, spiders, creepy crawly things could find their way into my house because the window's open. It could rain. The wind could blow. Leaves could come in. Rain could come in. It could flood my house. Take it a step further. Criminals. I just made it a whole lot easier for a criminal to break into my house. They can come in. They can steal my things. They could cause harm to me or to Ivy. You see, all these are possibilities. But if I want fresh air inside of my house, what other options do I have? I know some of you are smart Alecks. You're thinking about the other options that I have. Yes, I guess I could open a door instead, but I imagine I would get similar results. But I couldn't just go outside, because I know some of you are like, just walk outside, dummy, there's fresh air out there. I couldn't just walk outside. I want fresh air in my house. You see the analogy now? I want fresh air inside my house. So I can't just walk outside. Yes, I can get fresh air outside, but I can't get it in my house. The window's got to be open. So let me ask you for a second. Are you going to get mad at the window when bad things happen? Are you going to get mad at the window? Window, how could you? I thought we had a deal here. You're not supposed to let the rain in. You're not supposed to let all these animals in. You're not supposed to let the criminals in. Window, what are you doing? You're not going to get mad at the window. The window is simply doing what it was created to do. See, God is only doing His purpose. At the centerpiece of who He is, at His essence, His purpose is to love us. I can't just close the window. For to close the window would mean no fresh air. For God to close the window of His love would mean He could not love. Would mean He is not good, therefore He is not God. For He cannot go against His nature. You see, we have to change our perspectives. If I want fresh air in my house, that window has to stay open. But you see that persistence of keeping that window open, the consistency of God's love that is ever flowing, that never stops flowing. It's like that fresh wind just coming in constantly. That's how much He loves you. He loves you no matter what you've done, no matter what you're going to do. It is a constant, continuous flow of love. But for that window to stay open, that means there can be drawbacks. That means that there can be things that can happen that would not be good. But He can't just stop loving you. It's who He is. It's the center of His purpose. So since His love exists, there are all these things that can also get in and pollute and contaminate. See, I believe our underlying flaw really is that we don't think that God is good. At the essence of His core, we don't think that God is good. And just like Papa says there, your underlying flaw is that you don't think I'm good. She laughs and says, I am. Some of you need to hear that tonight. He is the I am. He is your I am. He is good. Good is the only thing that can come from Him. It is the only thing that can flow from Him. You're not going to get mad at the window for letting other things in. The purpose was to let the fresh air in. His purpose is to let His love into your life. Papa says to Matt, I'm in the middle of everything you perceive to be a mess, working for your good. See, that's the beauty of it. That is the beauty of it. That even though things can get in through the window of His love that aren't His love, the beauty of it is that He can still work it for good. Papa says then, if you knew me and how much I love you, then even when you don't understand, you could know that I am at work in your life for good, and then you would trust me. Then you would trust me. Remember the end of the conversation with wisdom. Max says, there has to be a better way, and it was a key theme throughout. It was a key theme throughout. You got to see it, even when they're he's in the boat and the waters are starting to flood. It was a key theme throughout. Jesus says, "Look to me, trust me." When He tells them, "Hey, you need to go up the mountain and you need to keep going. When you get to a dead end, you just keep going." He says, "Remember what you've learned," and He says, "Trust me." It's a key theme throughout this portion of tonight's viewing. Trust me. Trust me. At the end of the conversation with wisdom, wisdom says there is a better way, but the better way involves trust. The better way involves trust. And I want you to see the symbolism, because we just looked at it. He tells the legend of the Indian princess, and he says when she jumped off this cliff, and then the chief the next day was crying out to the Great Spirit for a sign that his daughter's sacrifice to be remembered, the Great Spirit answered, and that's when the water began to fall right there at Multnomah Falls. Now, I want you to recognize that, because I want to take you back to when he says, she says there has to be a better way, and he says there has to be a better way, and wisdom says there is, but the better way involves trust. And then he falls to his knees and he says, I don't want to be the judge anymore. Right there in that moment, Mac is putting his trust in something other than himself. He's relinquishing that control, that understanding that he thinks he has. And he's saying, I don't want to be the judge anymore. And immediately, if you notice, the water begins to fall. And then the scene ends with him being washed by the waters of our great sacrifice, Jesus. It's beautiful metaphor, and it's beautiful symbolism. But I don't know about you, but I'm thankful for that open window. Because honestly, I think most of the time in my life, and you probably can agree with this, most of the time in our life, we only recognize the bad things that blow in from the open window more often than we recognize the open window itself. The open window itself is God. It's God's love. But sometimes we get so caught up and we get so focused on the bad that happens to us. But I want you to know, I want you to be reassured tonight. God didn't allow it. God didn't cause it. We have to change our perspective. It is because of his love and because of his purpose that all these other things happen. It's who he is. So I'll take what comes. I'll take what comes in through the open window, for without it, the window would be closed and his love would not exist and he would not be God. I will trust that his love is so powerful that even as the evil that seeps through, I can trust he's in the mess. Just as Papa says, turning it for good, overwhelming it with his goodness. I rest in that tonight.